Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be stepping into like this really shadowy corner of history and current events, chemical warfare.
Yeah, we're going to look at how this really unsettling aspect of conflict has evolved over time.
And it feels relevant,
Yeah.
especially with the recent discoveries from the bin Laden compound.
Oh, absolutely.
Even the possibility of chemical weapons being involved,
Yeah,
there's a stark reminder of the enduring threat.
right. And it forces us to ask, could something like the horrors of World War I's gas attacks happen again?
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah,
But, I think understanding the past might help us understand the future.
for sure.
So let's rewind all the way back to the very beginning,
Okay,
to the earliest examples of chemical warfare.
right.
I was actually amazed to learn that using toxic substances in battle is not a new concept at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Ancient armies were already employing basic forms of chemical warfare. Think about Greek fire,
Oh, yeah?
a flammable liquid weapon used by the Byzantine Empire,
Right.
or the Spartans burning pitch and sulfur to create choking smoke.
So this urge to weaponize anything that gives you an edge over your enemy has been around for centuries.
Exactly. And in the 19th century, we see a shift towards a more systematic approach to using chemical agents. Colonial conflicts, unfortunately, provided a testing ground.
Right.
Yeah.
So that leads us to the 20th century and World War I, where chemical warfare took a really terrifying turn.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that first large-scale use of chemical weapons?
Well, the first major chlorine gas attack at Ypres in 1915 was a horrific turning point. Thousands of soldiers were caught, completely unprepared, their lungs burning, gasping for air. It changed the face of warfare forever.
It's hard to imagine the sheer terror of those early gas attacks.
Yeah.
The soldiers had no effective defenses, and the psychological impact must have been profound.
Imagine the constant fear of an invisible enemy,
Right.
the agonizing deaths,
Yeah.
and the long-term health consequences for those who survived. Mustard gas in particular caused horrific burns and lifelong respiratory issues. It wasn't just about physical casualties, it was about shattering morale and inflicting terror.
That's a really haunting point.
Yeah,
And as technology advanced, so did the methods of delivering these chemical agents.
absolutely. What started with releasing gas from cylinders quickly evolved to using artillery shells.
Right.
This allowed for more targeted and widespread attacks,
Wow.
turning these weapons into instruments of mass destruction.
And as we all know, scientific advancements can be a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
On the one hand, we have life-saving discoveries, and on the other, weapons like nerve gas.
The discovery of nerve gas is a prime example of this paradox.
It really is.
Gerhard Schrader, a German chemist researching insecticides in the 1930s,
Okay.
accidentally stumbled upon taboon, a deadly nerve agent.
Talk about unintended consequence.
Oh, yeah. A chilling reminder that even the most well-intentioned research can have terrifying applications.
Yeah.
And nerve gas is especially frightening. It's far more potent than chlorine or mustard gas,
Right.
capable of causing mass casualties with even minuscule exposures. It disrupts the nervous system, leading to paralysis and a horrific death.
So with such a devastating weapon now in existence, why wasn't nerve gas used more widely in World War II?
There are a few possible explanations. Some historians believe Hitler, who himself was a victim of a gas attack in World War I,
Oh, wow.
had a personal aversion to using chemical weapons, but, strategic considerations likely played a bigger role.
You mean the fear of retaliation?
Exactly. The Allies had developed their own chemical weapons programs, and the threat of a devastating counterattack was very real. There were also logistical challenges.
I see.
Unpredictable weather patterns could disrupt attacks, and the Germans were concerned about protecting their own troops.
But the absence of large-scale nerve gas attacks in World War II doesn't mean the chemical agents weren't present at all.
You're right. The tragic incident at the Bari Harbor in Italy, where a U.S. ship carrying mustard gas was bombed, serves as a harsh reminder of the unintended consequences these weapons can have. Hundreds of people, including civilians, were killed or injured in that accident. It highlights the risks associated with stockpiling and transporting these deadly substances.
And of course, the Cold War brought about a whole new chapter in this unsettling story.
Right.
The superpowers, fueled by suspicion and an arms race mentality, continue developing and stockpiling chemical weapons.
The Cold War was a time of intense paranoia.
Yeah.
Both sides feared a devastating chemical attack from the other. It was a terrifying standoff,
Wow.
with the threat of mutually assured destruction looming large.
It's a chilling reminder of how easily Fear and distrust can drive the development of increasingly destructive weapons.
And this brings us to a critical question. How have global efforts to control and eliminate chemical weapons fared in the face of such complex historical and political forces?
That's what we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of chemical warfare.
So we ended the last segment talking about the Cold War and the terrifying accumulation of chemical weapons by both superpowers. It's hard to imagine how humanity even moved away from that precipice.
Yeah, it was a pivotal moment in history. Thankfully, the realization that chemical weapons could lead to global annihilation
Right.
eventually spurred a push for international cooperation and arms control.
So how did the world begin to tackle this challenge?
Well, the first step was acknowledging the inherent inhumanity of chemical warfare, international agreements,
Right.
starting with the Geneva Protocol of 1925,
Right.
sought to ban the use of these weapons, but the focus shifted toward eliminating entire stockpiles.
And that eventually led to the Chemical Weapons Convention, or CWC, in 1993, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
The CWC is a landmark treaty that aims to completely eliminate chemical weapons. It bans the development, production, stockpiling, and use of these weapons,
Right.
and mandates their destruction.
That sounds comprehensive, but how do you actually enforce a treaty like that? How do you make sure countries are complying?
Well, the CWC has a robust verification regime that includes intrusive inspections. Teams of international inspectors can visit declared chemical weapons facilities and other sites to verify that countries are adhering to the treaty's provisions.
Right.
There's also a mechanism for investigating alleged use of chemical weapons.
It's heartening to know that such a mechanism exists, but the world is a complicated place.
It is.
Has the CWC been effective in preventing the use of chemical weapons?
It has been remarkably successful in many ways.
Okay.
Since the CWC entered into force, over 98% of the world's declared chemical weapons stockpiles have been destroyed.
Wow.
And while there have been tragic instances of use,
Right.
they've been far less frequent and on a much smaller scale compared to pre-CWC times.
That's a testament to the power of diplomacy and international cooperation, even when dealing with something as horrific as chemical weapons.
Well,
But haven't there been recent cases where these weapons have been used?
sadly, yes. The Syrian civil war, for example, saw the repeated use of chemical weapons,
Right.
primarily by the Syrian government against its own people. These attacks sparked international outrage and highlighted the limitations of the CWC when a state actor is determined to violate the treaty.
That's a sobering reminder that even the most well-intentioned agreements can be undermined by those who prioritize power over human life.
It also raises complex questions about how the international community should respond to such violations. What are the appropriate consequences for a state that breaks its commitments under the CWC?
These are incredibly difficult questions.
Yeah.
And what about the threat from non-state actors? Groups like terrorists, who might be less deterred by international norms and treaties.
That's another significant challenge.
Right.
The CWC was primarily designed to address the threat posed by nation-states, but the rise of non-state actors like terrorist organizations has created a new dimension to the problem.
It seems like controlling chemical weapons requires a multi-pronged approach, addressing both state and non-state actors.
Absolutely. And it's not just about preventing the use of existing weapons. We also need to think about emerging technologies that could potentially be used to create new, even more dangerous chemical agents.
That brings us to the uncomfortable reality that the quest to control chemical weapons is an ongoing process.
It is.
What are some of the key strategies for staying ahead of these evolving threats?
One crucial element is international cooperation and information sharing.
Yeah.
Countries need to work together to track the flow of dangerous chemicals, monitor scientific advancements, and develop countermeasures to potential threats.
It sounds like a constant game of cat and mouse between those who seek to weaponize these technologies and those working to prevent it.
That's a good way to put it. It requires vigilance, adaptability, and a willingness to invest in both scientific research and diplomatic efforts.
So where does that leave us? What's the overall outlook for the future of chemical weapons control?
Well, the landscape is undoubtedly complex and ever-changing, but I remain cautiously optimistic. The CWC, despite its limitations, has proven to be a powerful tool in reducing the global threat of chemical warfare.
But the existence of groups like those involved in the bin Laden compound, even the possibility of chemical weapons being present, underscores the importance of continued vigilance and a commitment to international cooperation.
Absolutely. We've come a long way, but the fight against chemical warfare is far from over.
It's clear that this is a conversation that needs to continue, especially with the increasing complexity of the world. And that brings us to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the ethical and philosophical implications of chemical warfare. Stay with us. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've covered the history of chemical warfare, the advancements in weaponry, and the complex efforts to control these devastating agents.
Yeah, and now we arrive at a question that goes beyond treaties and technologies.
Okay.
What does the existence of chemical warfare say about humanity itself?
It's a heavy question, and one that's been on my mind through this entire deep dive.
Yeah,
On the one hand, we see this incredible ingenuity in science and medicine,
right.
but that same knowledge can be twisted to create such horrific weapons.
It's a paradox that has haunted civilization for centuries. The capacity for creation and destruction seem to be intertwined.
Right.
We strive for progress, for a better future, yet we also invent ways to inflict unimaginable suffering on each other.
It's hard not to feel a sense of despair when you think about the soldiers gasping for air in the trenches of World War I, or the potential for modern-day terrorist groups to utilize these weapons.
It's understandable to feel that way, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the very act of questioning,
Right.
of grappling with this moral dilemma, is a sign of hope.
Can you elaborate on that?
By acknowledging the dark side of our ingenuity, by confronting the horrors of chemical warfare,
Okay.
we're engaging in a vital conversation about our values, our ethics, and the kind of world we want to create.
So it's not about ignoring the problem or pretending it doesn't exist, but rather facing it head on.
Precisely. We need to remember that the history of chemical warfare isn't just about weapons and battles.
Right.
It's about choices. It's about the decisions made by individuals, governments, and societies that led us to this point.
And if those choices led us down a dark path, then perhaps different choices can lead us toward a brighter future.
I believe that's the core message we need to take away from this deep dive.
Okay.
The future isn't predetermined.
Right.
We have the power to shape it, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and strive for a world where chemical weapons are relegated to the history books.
This deep dive has certainly been a journey. It's a stark reminder of the duality of human nature, capable of both immense good and terrible evil. Where do we go from here? What can we as individuals do to contribute to that brighter future?
The first step is awareness.
Okay.
By educating ourselves and others about the history and dangers of chemical warfare, we can help ensure that the lessons of the past aren't forgotten.
Right.
We can also support organizations working to eliminate these weapons and provide aid to victims of chemical attacks.
And as you mentioned earlier, engaging in these difficult conversations, challenging the status quo, and holding our leaders accountable for their actions are all crucial steps towards positive change.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The fight against chemical warfare is a collective effort. It requires international cooperation, scientific vigilance, and a shared commitment to building a world free from the threat of these horrific weapons. It's a monumental task, but one that I believe is worth fighting for.
Thank you for guiding us through this complex and at times unsettling topic. It's a reminder that knowledge is power, and that even when confronted with darkness, there's always hope for a brighter future. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic and join the conversation about how we can create a safer and more peaceful world.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of While We Were Distracted. We will continue our dive into documents and books found in the bin Laden compound that have been released by CIA. To see the full dump, check the description and comments or visit the CIA library at cia.gov. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.